Sequels aren't a common occurrence in the Sonic series. I mean, at least that's how it is nowadays, but back in the 90s and 2000s, numerous Sonic games got sequels. For every Sonic 1, we got a Sonic 2, for every SA1, we got an SA2. You know, we got our pretty fair share of Sonic sequels. However, the last sequel released for any mainline Sonic game was Sonic 4 Episode 2 back in 2012. Other than that, sure, we had sequels for side games, but that was it. Well, what if I told you there were numerous sequels in the works for many of your favorite Sonic games, but never saw the light of day? I guess we should start with the most recent and work our way down. We're going to be saving the best for last, alright? Anyway, Sonic Mania was revolutionary for the Sonic franchise. This game served as a reminder of what made the Sonic series so good in the first place, and it was a huge success. With that success, a sequel to the game was definitely discussed. Now, let me make something very clear. Sonic Mania 2 was never in development. Hell, it hardly even got to the conceptual stages. Evening Star, the developers of Mania, discussed the possibility of a sequel with Takashi Iizuka, the head of Sonic Team. But long story short, they just didn't want to make another pixelated classic Sonic game. Instead, they wanted to try something new, like a hand-drawn 2D art style or a 2.5D style, and that's how Sonic Superstars was born. God damn it. While Evening Star didn't necessarily have anything to do with Sonic Superstars, the game still used Mania's framework, and it still wasn't that great. Okay, don't get me wrong, Superstars is a pretty fun game, but we can all agree when I say that Sonic Mania 2 would have been much better, especially with the original team on board. However, I respect Evening Star a ton for wanting to do their own thing and make their own IP. Penny's Big Breakaway looks like a very fun game, and I can't wait to play it. I do think that Superstars would have been a better game with the Mania team working on it, but I'm still happy that Arzest gave us a decently fun experience. But what if a full sequel to Sonic Mania actually happened? Here's the thing. The reason why Sonic Mania was so successful in the first place was, for one, it was just a very well designed game, and for two, it was nostalgic for many veteran fans of the franchise. It was the perfect cash cow for Sega. If Mania 2 actually launched, I just can't see it being as successful as the first game, because it would have just been trying to recreate the success of the first game, instead of, you know, trying something new. And I feel like that's why many of these sequels were cancelled in the first place. Well, that's not necessarily the case for Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric though. Yeah, a sequel for Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric was planned at one point. The whole Sonic Boom sub-series of games was meant to be a massive thing, but of course, due to the failure of all three games, it just never took off. And that's part of the reason why Rise of Lyric 2 was cancelled. However, the 3DS version of the game, Shattered Crystal, actually got a sequel. Sonic Boom Fire and Ice is a pretty fun game if you ask me, because the developers of Shattered Crystal took all of the complaints that were made about that game, fixed them, and made a new game out of it. And while Fire and Ice didn't perform well at all, it was still a very fun game. Now, when it comes to Rise of Lyric, I feel like Big Red Button could have made a sequel that fixed all of its issues, just like Sanzaru Games did with Fire and Ice. They even left a cliffhanger at the end of Rise of Lyric because they were planning on doing a sequel, which is kind of sad to be honest. They wanted this series to be a massive success. Hell, they probably had multiple games planned for years down the line, but they just couldn't do it because of Sega's strict deadlines. But if this sequel actually happened, it would have needed to fix a lot of things. First, they gotta fix the performance issues. I know that Rise of Lyric was never meant to run on the Wii U, and because of that, it ran like absolute shit. But fixing the frame rate issues in particular would have made the game slightly better. Secondly, the gameplay loop in Rise of Lyric is not fun at all. I'm not necessarily opposed to puzzle solving and combat in this game, because this is a spin-off after all, but the puzzles are so generic and lifeless. Make some actual good and challenging puzzles and it could be a fun time. And of course, the combat. I'm not saying that it has to be as fleshed out as a game like Devil May Cry 5, even though that would be awesome, but it doesn't have to be a button mashing simulator either. Look at Sonic Frontiers. Even though the combat in that game just boils down to cutscenes that are mapped to different button combos, it's at the very least satisfying to pull off. It would also be nice if they could make the levels shorter. Some of the levels in Rise of Lyric lasted well over 10 minutes, so shortening them to around 3 to 4 minutes would be a dream. And funnily enough, Fire and Ice did the same thing with its level design. All I'm saying is that our Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric sequel could have been good given enough creative freedom and development time, but I guess we'll never know, and that's very unfortunate. Alright, moving back a couple of years and we have the release of Sonic 4 Episode 2, the second installment in what was meant to be the Sonic 4 trilogy of games. Yes, there was always meant to be a third game to the Sonic 4 series from the start, and honestly, it's pretty obvious why it was canned. The Sonic 4 series of games just wasn't that good. The first game was downright awful as the gameplay was boring, the level design was bland and uninspired, the music was shit. I could go on. It was not good at all. But then we have Sonic 4 Episode 2, which saw a lot of improvements. The level environments were much more interesting and the level layouts, while still still having a lot of issues that were present in the original game, were enhanced due to the Sonic and Tails team-up mechanics. Along with that, the game also had a pretty decent story. So yeah, the game was just much better. But similar to Sonic Boom, this game also ended on a cliffhanger, and we never got to see what happened afterwards. Now, a lot was going on behind the scenes when it comes to Sonic 4 Episode 3's development. Supposedly, it never got past the concept stages, but it's pretty clear what they wanted to do with this game. They wanted to introduce Knuckles to the series and market it as sort of a reimagining of Sonic 3. But with this, I bet they were planning on adding a ton of improvements as well. Sonic 4 Episode 2 featured unique level environments, but a lot of them still took heavy inspiration from previous games in the series. I bet Sonic 4 Episode 3 would have attempted to create brand new level environments. And since Knuckles was being added to the game, he probably would have had his campaign as well, whether that would have been a new set of levels or reimaginings of Sonic's levels. It's all very interesting to think about nonetheless. Sonic 4 Episode 3 could have very well been the 2D Sonic game we were all hoping for from the start. And what makes this even worse was that Christian Whitehead himself was supposedly going to hop on the dev team as well. Yeah, that's fucking depressing. Personally, I've been wanting a good 2D modern Sonic game for a very long time, arguably since the Rush games. This could have been that. It just goes to show that deadlines are an awful thing for Sonic games because they already improved a ton when they dropped Sonic 4 Episode 2. I can only imagine what improvements they would have added with the third episode. Who knows, maybe we'll get a proper 2D modern Sonic game soon. But it still sucks that Sonic 4 had so much potential, and the third game could have given it the success that it so desperately needed. Alright, so before we get into the big one, I wanted to talk briefly about the Sonic Chronicles sequel that was scrapped. So Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood was not good at all. It was a bare bones and uninspired RPG that looked, sounded, and played like a goddamn Flash game. And that's being generous. This game was so bad, so it's obvious why the sequel to the game was cancelled. But actually, it wasn't cancelled because the first game performed poorly. It was actually because of a guy called Ken Penders, who worked on the Archie comics. The problem was that Sonic Chronicles included characters that resembled his Archie comic creations. Then multiple lawsuits happened, and yeah, it was a mess. Now, I am choosing to remain neutral in this situation because there's corrupt shit going on both sides here, but let's just all be thankful that we never got Sonic Chronicles 2 because it probably would have been terrible. I'm not saying that a Sonic RPG could never be good, I'm just saying that the whole Sonic Chronicles thing was already a lost cause. There would have been no point in trying to continue that. Alright, where was I? Oh yeah, the Storybook series. So the Storybook series of games was meant to be more than just 2 games. We got Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight. But the term Storybook series didn't get coined until Black Knight's release. It even had a cool little graphic in the corner of the box art. It was clear that they wanted the Storybook series to be massive. But unfortunately, they only made 2 games. One of them being trash and the other being mediocre at best. In my opinion, that is. Sorry, I just don't like these games. But hey, that's just me. Anyway, to no one's surprise, a third Storybook game was originally planned. Now, it is currently unknown how far this game got into development because all we have is a survey that Sega posted on Facebook, which gathered fan feedback on what they wanted the next game to be based on. The options were film noir, Greek mythology, horror, sci-fi, or western. The winner was Greek mythology, which, while yes, that would have been a great pick for the next game, I think all these other themes would have been very interesting to see. I don't know how they could have made a Sonic horror game work, but I'm intrigued to say the least. I think western and film noir could also be very interesting, but I don't think that would have necessarily been appealing to a younger audience. Sci-fi is a weird one though, because that is such a broad genre that Sonic already fits in some cases, but it would have been interesting to see what they could do with that as well. Regardless, the Storybook series had a lot going for it, and it would have been cool to see how Sonic would fit into these different genres. But there's another aspect of the Storybook series that became a staple, and that is the Wii's motion controls. Yes, both games were Wii exclusive, as they both took advantage of the Wiimote's capabilities. Secret Rings used the tilt controls as the entire control scheme, and yeah, it was pretty bad. Thankfully, Black Knight let you use an actual thumbstick, and instead, the motion controls were designated to the sword, but the movement still felt pretty off. Now here's the thing, the next Storybook game would have probably dropped around the time the Wii U was released, meaning that it probably would have taken advantage of the Wii U gamepad's features rather than the Wiimote's. This in itself would have been awesome. Just think of what they could have done with the Wii U gamepad. The Storybook series of games is known for having gimmicks, so it's safe to say that the third game would have had a unique gimmick that would have utilized the features of the Wii Wii U gamepad. But yeah, even though I was never really a huge fan of the Storybook series, I can acknowledge that it had a ton of potential. A potential that could have been realized with a third installment, but unfortunately, we'll never see that fully realized. I think they should have given this series one more shot because, again, there was so much they could have done with it. But it's also understandable why they left it. The Sonic series is constantly evolving, meaning that it can't just stick to one thing for a very long time. And that's the reason why most of these sequels got cancelled in the first place. These games take a very long time to develop, so why spend all of that time and resources making a game that's just a follow-up rather than making a completely new project? Even though some of these sequels would have been awesome to see, it's completely understandable why Sega chose to scrap them. But yeah guys, that's going to end this video. Let me know what you all think about these games in the comments down below. But that's all for me, so thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.